If you've ever picked up a basketball or even just watched a game on TV, you know exactly who Michael Jordan is. He is largely considered by most as the greatest of all time, a pure, undisputed icon of the sport. And throughout his career, Michael Jordan had plenty of legendary seasons. You have his final run with the Chicago Bulls in 1998, where he buried that last iconic shot to seal his legacy. Then you have the incredible 1996 campaign, where he led the Bulls to a blistering 72-10 regular season record and walked away with another ring. But there is one specific year that stands out from all the rest, the year that silenced every single critic, the year that birthed a dynasty, the season that truly made him unstoppable, and quite frankly, one of the craziest seasons in NBA history. Was 1990 to 1991. Before the rings, before the global brand, before the undisputed greatest of all time status, there was doubt, a lot of it. Going into the fall of 1990, the narrative surrounding Michael Jordan was entirely different than the one we know today. People didn't view him as a winner, they viewed him as a spectacle. The critics were loud, and they all repeated the exact same three phrases. He's just a scorer. He'll never make his teammates better. He can't win championships. Sure, he had already captured a Defensive Player of the Year award. He already had an MVP trophy sitting on his mantle. He was defying gravity on a nightly basis and putting up numbers the league hadn't seen since Wilt Chamberlain. But none of it mattered, because every single spring, the season ended exactly the same way, with Michael Jordan walking off the floor, battered, bruised, and eliminated. The obstacle standing in his way wasn't just a basketball team. It was a physical, bruising, unapologetic nightmare known as the Detroit Pistons, the Bad Boys. Led by Isaiah Thomas, Joe Dumars, Dennis Rodman, and Bill Laimbeer, Detroit didn't just beat you, they beat you up. Head coach Chuck Daly had engineered a defensive scheme specifically designed to destroy number 23. They called it the Jordan Rules. The strategy was brutally simple. Every time Michael drove to the basket, he was going to hit the floor hard. Detroit threw a wall of bodies at him, forcing him left, trapping him in the paint, and hammering him anytime he left his feet. It worked. The Pistons eliminated the Bulls in 1988. They did it again in 1989, and in 1990, they pushed Chicago to a grueling Game 7 in the Eastern Conference Finals, only to crush them once again. Jordan was exhausted. He was carrying the entire offensive load on his back, playing spectacular basketball, and it still wasn't enough. Something had to change. Enter Phil Jackson. When Jackson took over as head coach, he proposed a massive gamble, a system called the triangle offense. The media ripped the idea. Pundits questioned why anyone in their right mind would take the basketball out of the hands of the most lethal scorer on the planet. Even Jordan hated it at first. To him, passing the ball to a role player in the final seconds of a tight game felt like surrendering. But Jackson challenged him. He told Michael that if he wanted to beat Detroit, he couldn't do it alone. He had to trust the guys sharing the floor with him. And slowly, Jordan bought in. Instead of forcing heavily contested shots against double and triple teams, he started moving off the ball. That shift changed the landscape of the entire NBA because it allowed a young, lanky forward out of Central Arkansas to step into the spotlight, Scottie Pippen. Pippen was no longer just a defensive specialist or a background character. Under the triangle, he exploded into an all-NBA caliber superstar. He became the ultimate point forward, a defensive terror who could run the floor and take the pressure off Michael. Horace Grant developed into a highly reliable third option. John Paxson found wide-open space to knock down big perimeter shots. The Chicago Bulls were no longer the Michael Jordan show. They were a complete multi-headed monster, and the rest of the league was about to find out exactly how terrifying that was. Right out of the gate in the 1990 to 1991 regular season, Jordan played with a completely different level of venom. He finished the regular season averaging 31.5 points, 6 rebounds, 5.5 assists, and 2.7 steals. The voters didn't even hesitate. He took home his second MVP award, another scoring title, All-NBA First Team, and All-Defensive First Team honors. It was the ultimate confirmation that he was, without a shadow of a doubt, the best player breathing. But Jordan didn't care about the regular season hardware. He didn't care about the scoring title. He only cared about the playoffs. He only cared about getting back to the one team that had tortured him for years. The Detroit Pistons were waiting. But first, Chicago had to survive the opening rounds. The real season began in late April. The playoffs. Chicago's first assignment? The New York Knicks. Led by their towering, imposing center, Patrick Ewing, the Knicks were a gritty, blue-collar basketball team. Ewing was a 7-foot, shot-blocking menace anchoring the paint. New York's game plan was clear. They wanted to slow the pace to an absolute crawl, turn the game into a street fight, and force Michael Jordan into heavily contested, low-percentage jump shots. The strategy was to funnel him directly into Ewing's chest every single time he drove the lane. In years past, this kind of defensive wall might have frustrated Chicago. It might have baited Jordan into playing hero ball, but this wasn't the old Bulls. The triangle offense spaced the floor brilliantly. Because Jordan was now willingly passing out of double teams, Ewing was constantly pulled out of position to cover cutting players. The Knicks' defensive scheme completely collapsed inward. Chicago swept them 3-0. It was a bloodbath, but the road only got tougher. Up next in the Eastern Conference semifinals were the Philadelphia 76ers, led by none other than Charles Barkley. Barkley was an absolute wrecking ball, the round mound of rebound. He was incredibly strong, deceptively fast, and completely fearless. Philadelphia's strategy was to bully Chicago's front court, dominate the glass, and force a chaotic track meet. They wanted to stress Jordan by making him outscore a relentless, bruising Philadelphia offense all by himself. They threw multiple rotating defenders at him, hoping to wear out his legs by the fourth quarter. But again, Jordan refused to take the bait. He trusted Scottie Pippen to handle Barkley defensively. He trusted Horace Grant to fight for every crucial rebound. And when it was time to close the door, Michael simply slammed it shut. In Game 5, the 76ers were desperate. They threw every defensive look in the playbook at him. It didn't matter. Jordan meticulously picked them apart, exploding for 38 points to eliminate Philadelphia and send them packing. He was entirely locked in. His eyes were completely fixed on the next round, because waiting for them in the Eastern Conference Finals was the ghost that had haunted Chicago for 3 straight years: the Detroit Pistons. The defending back-to-back NBA champions. This was the matchup the entire world was waiting for, the immovable object against the unstoppable force. Detroit still had Isaiah Thomas initiating the offense. They still had Joe Dumars playing suffocating perimeter defense. They still had Bill Laimbeer throwing vicious elbows in the paint. But almost immediately, you could feel a shift in the atmosphere. The bad boys were aging. Their legs looked a little heavier. The physical wear and tear of multiple deep championship runs was starting to show. And more importantly, the Bulls were no longer terrified of them. In Game 1, Chicago held serve at home, but it was Game 2 that truly changed the trajectory of NBA history. Detroit came out swinging, desperately trying to implement the Jordan rules. They hammered Michael on drives. They tried to get in his head with trash talk, but Chicago punched back hard. Jordan didn't complain to the referees. He didn't force bad shots. He just kept attacking. He completely took control of the series, scoring at will and setting up his teammates. The Bulls won Game 2, proving once and for all they were no longer intimidated by the bullies of the East. The aura of the Detroit Pistons was cracking. You could see it on the face of Dennis Rodman. Although Rodman was still a defensive terror for Detroit, his increasing frustration was boiling over on the court. The Pistons were losing their grip, and Rodman's visible agitation foreshadowed the massive changes that would eventually lead to his departure from the franchise. Detroit's dominance was fading in real time. By the time the series shifted back to Michigan, the Pistons were broken. Chicago took Game 3 on the road, setting up a closeout situation in Game 4. This was it, the ultimate revenge. On May 27, 1991, the Chicago Bulls utterly dismantled the Detroit Pistons on their home floor. The final buzzer was looming, and the scoreboard showed a massive blowout. The 4-0 sweep was inevitable. What happened next became one of the most controversial and talked about moments in sports history. With exactly 7.9 seconds left on the clock in Game 4, Isaiah Thomas looked over at Bill Laimbeer. A decision was made. Thomas, Laimbeer, Mark Aguirre, and several other Pistons players simply walked off the court. They marched right past the Chicago bench. No handshakes, no congratulations, no passing of the torch to the new kings of the East. They walked directly into the tunnel before the game was even officially over. It was a stunning act of poor sportsmanship, an incredibly bitter exit for a back-to-back champion, but it was also the birth of a deeply personal, decades-long feud. Michael Jordan took that walk-off completely personally.
That's sportsmanship, no matter how much it hurts. And believe me, it fucking hurt.
He viewed it as a blatant sign of disrespect from a team he had forced himself to shake hands with after they beat him in 1988, 1989, and 1990. That single decision by Isaiah Thomas to lead his team down the tunnel created a rift that would alter basketball history. The bad blood spilled directly over into the formation of the 1992 Olympic Dream Team.
Our icy relationship with Isaiah Thomas is the reason that he was not selected.
When USA Basketball was assembling the greatest roster ever constructed, Isaiah Thomas was inexplicably left off the team. Why? Because Jordan allegedly made an ultimatum. If Isaiah was on the roster, Michael wasn't playing. The walk-off had cemented a permanent disdain. Even 3 decades later, during the filming of the Last Dance documentary, Jordan refused to accept Thomas's excuses for leaving the court. The wounds from those 7.9 seconds never healed. Detroit chose to walk away in shame. But as the Pistons faded into the shadows of the tunnel, Michael Jordan stood on the court, victorious. He had finally slain his biggest demon. The Jordan rules were dead. He was heading to his very first NBA Finals, but standing in his way was the final boss of the 1980s, a team dripping in championship experience. Magic Johnson and the Los Angeles Lakers. The stage was finally set. The 1991 NBA Finals. This wasn't merely a basketball series. It was a cultural clash of eras. On one side, you had Michael Jordan, the undisputed scoring king, the aerial artist, the man desperate to prove he could win on the highest level. On the other side, the Los Angeles Lakers, the kings of the 1980s, led by the legendary Magic Johnson. This roster was drenched in championship pedigree. Magic already had 5 rings on his fingers. He was the ultimate maestro, the defining winner of his generation. Alongside him was James Worthy, famously known as Big Game James, and a massive front court featuring Vlade Divac and Sam Perkins. The Lakers knew exactly how to win in June. The Bulls had absolutely no idea what June basketball even felt like, and the media made sure to remind everyone of that fact. Heading into the series, the overwhelming narrative was experience over athleticism. Experts expected the battle-tested Lakers to outsmart the high-flying Bulls. Magic Johnson was a proven champion. Michael Jordan was still just a guy trying to get over the hump. Game 1 tipped off inside a deafening Chicago stadium. The atmosphere was electric, but the Bulls came out looking completely frozen by the moment. They played tight. They made uncharacteristic mistakes. Magic Johnson masterfully controlled the tempo, slowing the game down and dissecting Chicago's defense. Late in the fourth quarter, with the game hanging in the balance, Sam Perkins buried a clutch three-pointer to give the Lakers a late lead. Michael Jordan had a chance to tie it, but his final shot rimmed out. The Lakers stole Game 1 on Chicago's home floor, 93-91. Instantly, the critics pounced. The morning papers were ruthless. The whispers grew into screams. People wondered out loud if Jordan was destined to remain ringless forever. Could he really beat Magic Johnson on the biggest stage? The Bulls were backed into a corner. Lose Game 2, and the series was effectively over before the flight to Los Angeles. Phil Jackson needed a spark. He needed an adjustment that would completely derail the Lakers' rhythm. So, he made a defensive switch that changed everything. Jackson took Michael Jordan off Magic Johnson and handed the assignment to Scottie Pippen. Pippen picked up Magic full court, 94 feet of absolute defensive hell. His length, speed, and lateral quickness completely disrupted the Lakers' offensive flow. Magic couldn't just casually back his way into the paint anymore. Every single dribble was a street fight. With Pippen suffocating the engine of the Lakers, Michael Jordan was entirely unleashed on the offensive end. Game 2 was a massacre. Chicago blew the doors off Los Angeles. Jordan dropped 33 points, hitting 13 consecutive shots in a legendary shooting display. But nobody remembers the box score. They only remember one specific play. In the fourth quarter, Jordan received the ball near the free throw line. He took one hard dribble and exploded into the air, cocking the ball back in his right hand, ready to unleash a vicious slam dunk. Sam Perkins rotated over to contest the shot, putting his body directly in Jordan's flight path. Any other player on earth would have taken the foul. Any other player would have crashed to the floor. Michael Jordan simply defied gravity. Hanging in midair, suspended while the rest of the world watched in slow motion, Jordan brought the ball down. He switched it from his right hand to his left hand and kissed the ball beautifully off the glass. The crowd erupted. Marv Albert screamed into the microphone, delivering his iconic call. It was a devastating display of mid-air arrogance, a defining signature moment of his entire career. Chicago tied the series 1-1, and the momentum had completely shifted. The series traveled to the Great Western Forum in Los Angeles for the next 3 games. The Lakers were back on their home floor, expecting to reclaim control. Instead, the Bulls ripped their hearts out. Chicago took Game 3 in a brutal overtime thriller. Jordan forced the extra period with a clutch jumper, and then completely took over, putting the Bulls up 2-1. In Game 4, Chicago suffocated the Lakers' offense once again, turning the famous Showtime into a grinding, miserable slog. The Bulls secured a commanding 3-1 lead. The Lakers were broken. Their bodies were battered, with James Worthy suffering a severe ankle injury, which brings us to Game 5, June 12, 1991. The Los Angeles Lakers refused to go quietly. Magic Johnson fought desperately, dishing out 20 assists in a brilliant, prideful performance. But there was no stopping destiny. Michael Jordan was a man possessed. He wasn't just scoring, he was doing everything. He tore apart the Lakers' defense, found his open teammates, and locked down the perimeter. When the final buzzer echoed through the Forum, the scoreboard read Chicago 108, Los Angeles 101. It was over. Jordan finished Game 5 with 30 points, 10 assists, and 5 steals. He dominated the entire series, averaging an absurd 31.2 points, 6.6 rebounds, and 11.4 assists per game. He didn't just win the championship, he took it by force. He was unanimously named the Finals MVP. The celebration on the court was wild. Teammates embraced, champagne was prepared, and the city of Chicago exploded into a frenzy. But the most powerful visual of the night didn't happen under the bright arena lights. It happened deep inside the visitors' locker room. Amidst the chaos, the flashing cameras, and the screaming reporters, Michael Jordan found a quiet corner. He sat down by his locker, clutching the gold Larry O'Brien trophy against his chest. Sitting directly beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulder, was his father, James Jordan. Michael buried his face into his arm, and he sobbed. He wasn't crying because he won a basketball game. He was crying because the weight of the entire world had finally been lifted off his shoulders. Every single critic had been silenced. He's just a scorer. Dead. He can't make his teammates better. Dead. He can't win championships. Dead forever. Magic Johnson and Larry Bird had completely defined the 1980s, but as Magic walked off the floor that night, the torch wasn't just passed, it was snatched. Jordan had ushered in an entirely new era. He was now the undisputed face of the NBA. And the terrifying part for the rest of the league, this wasn't the culmination of his career, it was merely the prologue. The 1991 championship wasn't just a title, it was the birth of the Chicago Bulls dynasty. It laid the foundation for the 1992 and 1993 championships, completing their first historic three-peat. Because once Michael Jordan finally learned how to win, he refused to ever stop.